let's go then. So thank you all for attending this webinar today. I'm Karis. I'm one of the accounts executives at Capdesk from Carter, and I am excited to take you through some Captable training today. So perhaps it would be best to start off with a little bit about Capdesk. We were voted Europe's #1 equity management platform this year. You can see we have a couple of our customers on the slide here on the right. So we're used by companies from incorporation all the way to exit to simplify equity management. So I guess just to share today's agenda with you and maybe do a little bit of housekeeping. Today, I want to start telling you all about cap tables and how cap tables work. And then from there, we'll go through a case study of a company from incorporation to exit and explain how that equity actually develops. So obviously, I can't cover everything, but I am aware that the majority of you have passed the earlier stages of this process. So congratulations on that, first of all. And I will go through the first slides a little bit quicker. So for those of you who are maybe a little bit more advanced, please feel free to contact us after the webinar, and we can certainly put some time aside to talk in more detail about cap table management. I don't think we're going to run to time today, so there will be time for questions. And I have one of my colleagues, Emmett, here, who will be checking the chat box. So if you have any questions throughout, please just drop them in the chat box, and Emmett and I will get back to you at the end of the presentation. So let's get into it. So simply, what is a cap table? Well, in a nutshell, a cap table is a summary of who owns what part of the company. And it's a list of all the securities you have given out to stakeholders in your company. So why is that important? Well, this is the currency for all private companies. If your company is ever sold or you're selling your equity, it shows what you're entitled to, and you use a cap table whenever you're raising a funding round, or you've got a liquidity event, or whenever you want to set up an employee share plan. So you use a cap table to determine who will own what portion of the company. Now, this list here might look very simple, and there is a reason for that. So as our founder, Christian Gabriel, says, a cap table should be built simple, but understood complex. So the more simple your cap table is, the better job you've done. And we like to think of it as a little bit of a matrix. And I think these 3 pillars here are something that I will keep coming back to throughout the session. So the first thing is ownership. And I think that is how most people understand the cap table. So in a nutshell, how much in percentage do I own of this company? The second thing is legal rights. So different shareholders and security holders are entitled to different legal rights, and this will become especially prevalent further down the line when things get more complicated on your cap table. And lastly, equity, of course, is all about getting that cash reward. So obviously, the way you structure securities and equity on the cap table has a lot to do with tax optimization as well. And in the very middle of all this, we have our cap table that needs to be simple, clean, and easily understood. So let's move on to our case study. This presentation we've recorded, it will be available after the webinar's over, so you can always refer back to it. And again, please reach out directly to us if there's anything you'd like me to elaborate on. So let's start. On the left, you see we have Ash Birch. He is a typical cool guy, East London startup founder. That's actually where our London office is based. And he has a great idea. He wants to make an online service for trees, and that is called Tree Hugger, as we see on the right-hand side here. So Ash doesn't know anything about starting a company, and now he's going to incorporate his first business. So how do we do that? I think, first of all, shares always have a price. And I think that's a common misconception. So even though Ash has to incorporate the company, he has to put cash into that company. So he incorporates Tree Hugger Limited with 100,000 shares at a cost of £0.1 a share. That means that Tree Hugger now has one shareholder and has £10,000 in its company's capital. The share price of your incorporation is called the nominal value. Just on a side note here, this is rather sensible move from Ash to form his company, starting with 100,000 shares. Sometimes a first-time founder may start with 1 or 2, 3 or 4 shares because it's cheaper, and that would make sense. But starting out with a lot of shares in the beginning makes it easier to distribute ownership going forward without having to do share splits or share mergers. So Ash is our CEO, but obviously he needs a CTO. So then we have Elm here. Again, he's the classic cool CTO. He looks a little bit like Ash, but he has glasses. So Elm is going to quit his job and he's going to get equal equity in Treehugger. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Elm cannot get 50% unless he pays the same as Ash. So what happens now is that Treehugger issues. And the share price is the same. So it's 0.1, which means that the company now has 2 shareholders and £20,000 in capital. So let's get started. Ash and Elm are doing really well, and soon they're ready for their first investor. So here we have Buddy Rich. He's not just a jazz drummer, he is an investor. And in this case, he would like to invest £1 million into Treehugger. So they decide on a £4 million pre-money valuation. That means that the total amount of shares in the company, which is 200,000, is now worth £4 million. Hence, in this case, the nominal value has gone up. So Buddy Rich has invested £1 million into the company. Therefore, the post-money valuation has reached 5 million. So Ash and Elm, they're new to the business. They're about to close the transaction. They're very impressed with themselves. They've got their first angel investor on board, £1 million they can use to scale their tree technology. However, Buddy Rich is a smart investor and he suggests something different. This is incredibly important. So Buddy Rich knows that in order for Ash and Elm to grow the company substantially at the rate that he would like, they need to find key employees. And in order to find, attract, and keep those key employees in the company, they need to issue some options. Now, I'm going to get to options in the next slide, but options are not shares. So just keep that in mind. It's a legal entitlement and not current ownership. But I can get to that in the next slide. So because Buddy knows they're going to give out options to future employees, he does not want to fund those options. He wants the co-founders, so Ash and Elm, he wants Ash and Elm to fund the options. And this is what we call an option pool shuffle. So if we remember, Ash and Elm's percentage before was 40%. Now you can see that they have given up 5% each in order to fund the option pool of 10%. Whilst Buddy Rich here, he still has his 20%. So deciding whether to create the option pool before the investment or after the investment is quite clever. For example, if they had decided to create after the investment, you see their percentage has actually gone up here because they've not had to fund as much of the pool. And Buddy Rich, his percentage has gone down. So the option pool shuffle is a very, very useful negotiation tactic for both investors and entrepreneurs. So now we have our option pool set up. Let's discuss how the options investing works. So options are mainly used here in the UK, and they offer the holder the right to buy company shares at a predetermined price. So how do options work? Let's give an example. So let's just take Instagram. So let's say you have the right to buy a share in Instagram for £60. Now, that doesn't mean that you have the share. It just means you have the option to buy shares in Instagram at £60. Now, over time, the price of those shares has actually reached £165. So the price you have to pay is what we call a strike price or an exercise price. Basically, the price you have to pay to convert those options into shares. So if you look at this example here, let's say you have 6,000 options in Instagram. Then you waited a few years and the time has come to exercise. So what would that cost you? So first, we have to do a calculation of our 6,000 options times our £60 strike price, giving us a total of 360,000. That is what you would need to pay in order for you to claim those shares. So in order to find out what the market value of those shares is, because obviously that's super important, you would have to take the new price, £165 here, times 6,000 or 6,000 shares, minus the exercise price. So the gains here is simply the difference between the strike price and the current price. So you typically cap the amount of options that you can get in a company. So let's just say that I work in Instagram, and after a week, I get a little bit tired of it, so I left. You don't want to give employees like me options that have been there a week so that I can then go and buy shares in the future, which is why you set up an option scheme and a vesting schedule in order to earn those options over time, which moves into our vesting schedule. So pardon this slightly complicated looking graph on the right. It is actually fairly simple. To explain a little bit more about how a common vesting schedule looks, we typically see a 4-year schedule for option grants. These will start with a cliff, as you can see here. Basically, this cliff is employers saying, we want to give you equity into the company, but only when you have been with the company long enough to earn it. So almost like a trial period, and that's usually fixed at a year. And if an employee passes that cliff, typically they will then receive 25% of the entire grant, and from there, the shares will vest at a linear rate for the remaining 3 years. This is super important for employees to understand how this vesting works. So, for example, on Capdesk, if your employee has options, they will be able to log into their employee dashboard, and they can say, oh, I've passed the cliff now, I'm vesting linear, I've vested 3 more options, etc. And I think what we're finding at Capdesk is this employee knowledge around equity and options and the equity they hold is incredibly key. So this is where it gets definitely a little bit more complex. Keeping track of all these grants is tricky, and we do want to always keep a very clean overview. So this is where I would say that we see the most mistakes when companies come to us at Capdesk. So the devil is most certainly in the detail here. We would split our option pool up into authorized options, available options, outstanding options, and exercised options. So let's say an option holder leaves the company, and those options either exercise or they lapse. If they lapse, they return back to our available options. And if exercised, they are then converted within the exercise interval. This can cause numerous human errors in the option pool if it's not closely watched, if it's in spreadsheets. And I think that is where a system like Capdesk really, really comes into play. So let's get back to Ash and Elm now. Treehugger has hired lots and lots of employees, and being unable to compete on salary, they've decided to reward early hires with equity. So a no-brainer really, Ash decides to set up an EMI scheme. Just to give you a little bit of background on an EMI scheme, for anyone who's unaware, just so you know, we do have resources on our website that go into further detail on this, but the most common way for UK businesses to award equity to employees is via an EMI scheme. Businesses with assets of 30 million or less can offer employees share options of 250,000 in a 3-year period. So it does have tax advantages for employees, which is why it's the most common way to go. With that being said, however, the EMI scheme does have regulations, and not all companies are eligible. So CSOP schemes are also widely used in the UK to incentivize employees. So just to use this in our Ash and Elm example, let's jump a little bit into the future. So later down the road, Treehugger have outgrown that EMI scheme. So they then set up a CSOP scheme. So that's also, again, very prevalent within the UK. So to issue either an EMI or a CSOP scheme, Treehugger needs a company valuation. So this is a really important piece because for any EMI or CSOP scheme, as I said, you do need a pre-cleared company valuation from HMRC to be compliant. These expire every 90 days. So if you are issuing on a rolling basis, then you may need up to 4 valuations a year. And obviously we want to attract and retain talent with equity. So it's worthwhile to update the company valuation whenever needed, so you can keep motivating the workforce with that equity. And at Capdesk, we also do generate the HMRC and the company's house filings after you've made those issuances as well. Now, I've also included the 409A here. Now, it's becoming a very common in the startup space to expand into the US. So if you do have plans to hire in the US or you employ any US citizens, you will need the 409A valuation as well. Maybe to just give you a little bit of background on the 409A, you may have heard about the Enron scandal. And if not, it does make for a great Google search after this presentation. So basically, Enron, they falsified their market value of shares. And off the back of this, the IRS in the US introduced the 409A valuations. The reason I'm making a point of this is that we do see businesses come to us all the time without a 409A when they need one, simply because businesses don't realize that that is a requirement, especially if they're based in the UK. So again, it's very, very important to get that audit-proof 409A if it's applicable. Capdesk, as it says here, we do provide a fully integrated valuation service with the HMRC and IRS support from our in-house experts, pardon me. So you can be covered on both fronts there if applicable. But let's move back to Ash and Elm. Now, you might have noticed we did skip the seed round for Ash and Elm because we thought you guys may actually be past that point. So now Ash and Elm, let's jump a little into the future. They've raised a total of 2 million and they're growing the company rapidly. So the demand for trees online has never been higher, which means they get to the next big series round, Series A. And here we have our VCs. So we have Oak Ventures, Moneyleaf Partners, and Dollar Dogwood VC, who together would like to put 15 million into Tree Hugger at a 20 million pre-money valuation. Now, how Tree Hugger would close a round like this is to start by preparing the cap table. That's the very first part of the negotiation. So you prepare the cap table in order to negotiate the deal. So let's work out what our Series A investment is based on. Just to note here, there was a seed investment from Pre-Tree Ventures in the seed round, which we didn't cover. But let's just start by calculating with a share price of £70 and an investment of 15 divided by 3. And now we know that the full amount of shares with Pre-Tree Ventures is 314.268. And there's no debt left. As you can see here, there's no debt left because that's all been converted. So that's the total amount of shares in the company right now, including the option pool without Dollar Dogwood and Moneyleaf. Just a side note, I did not come up with these names. So let's figure out how much they're going to get. Now, Oak Ventures, Moneyleaf Partners, and Dollar Dogwood want to invest into a new share class called Preferred A shares. Now, this is key because when you create a new share class, you give out a new type of right, which is typically to the VCs, and it means more power, higher access. It means more control of the board in terms of voting pressure, or it means quicker access to the cash in terms of exit. So whenever there's a new share class made, it does overrule the powers of the other classes, which means that you tier up a kind of power positioning on the cap table, where the latest investors have much more power than the second latest investor, and so on and so forth. But to keep things simple, they're investing into a preferred share class, And all three VCs are having shares in that share class, and the rest of the company are keeping their ordinary shares. So you can see here, we have our ordinary shares, and then we have our A preferred shares. And if we look now, we can see the before and after, and you can see how those preferred shares affects the cap table. So let's shoot a little bit further into the future. So Tree Hugger is hiring, they're growing rapidly. The company's hired 100 employees. They've raised a Series B, they're headed for Series C. Round modeling has been crucial to each funding round, and obviously that new cohort of investors. So now it is time for the exit. So Forest Inc. want to acquire Tree Hugger for £50 million, and Tree Hugger now needs to divide the proceeds. That's great news, but how does that actually happen? This is where the cap table becomes very, very important, because it's, so to speak, the invoice that every single investor or employee or security holder can say that I'm entitled to this. And it's very hard to know what you're actually going to get in an exit. So how do we calculate who gets what? So the company creates something called an exit modeling or a waterfall scenario. And believe it or not, I know this looks a little complicated, but this is actually a simplified way just to see, roughly how this would work. I won't go through every single calculation here, but basically the exit model looks at all of the legal entitlements, all of the securities that you have, and also some of the tax setups. And then it starts calculating who gets what. So in this case, we just went through our preferred A preference, which we just spoke about. So let's look at that one. The cost is 50 million here. So Dollar Dogwood, you can see, takes out 5 million. That's times 1 A liquidation preference. Then Money Leaf takes out 1, and then Oak Ventures takes out 1. That means there's 35 million left. In this example, earlier in the example, we did have some performance-based options that we didn't get to go through in this presentation, but in the end, they didn't convert, so they were cancelled anyway. What you can see here is there is a big significance on whether you're preferred A shares or ordinary shares, and that's something that I really wanted to emphasize. And lastly, something quite interesting, just as we started with Ashanel, we should finish with Ashanel. What you can see is that in this case is even though they exit for 50 million, they actually only get around 6.9 million out. And I know we can't feel too bad for Ash and Elm, and I certainly would not be turning down 6.9 million. But I do think it's an interesting point to make. And I think finally here, what I want to highlight is our option holders. So this is definitely a case I'm making for everyone listening in. You should see that the employees are actually only getting around £540,000 out of that 50 million. So the main point I'm making there, I guess, is with the option plans that you choose, make sure to communicate with your employee how that equity works. And I think coming back to this, education for employees regarding equity is incredibly important, especially on an exit. So we did a lot here. I think the learnings from this presentation, we incorporated a company, we found a co-founder, we created an option pool and we got an angel investor, we created a share plan, we got our valuations done, we closed Series A, we scaled up a bit, and then we exited. And I think the learnings that I want to convey here is that the option pool in the option pool shuffle is incredibly important. All of the option pool management is vital in order to avoid costly mistakes that we've seen at Capdesk. And as we saw later in the presentation, preferred shares and multiple share classes will change the whole cap table and how an exit will look. So be aware of that. It has been said that sometimes it's better to raise on a lower valuation rather than creating a new share class, but that is a whole different topic and game between the VC and the entrepreneur. I think finally what I want to say, I know we have spoken a little bit about Capdesk, And this presentation has given an overview into equity management as the business grows. There's many other finer details along the way that are important to consider. But I think everything we talked about today, Capdesk from Carter provides industry-leading support with. And there is a very good reason why we are the world's leading equity management platform. Some of the reasons why businesses choose us is that we do offer full end-to-end support from incorporation to potential IPO, like Ashanel. We offer in-house valuations that are fully compliant and audit-proof, as we went through earlier. That is key. And we offer the ability not only to manage employee option schemes and sign option schemes end-to-end within the platform, but also give employees engagement and knowledge from our employee dashboard. And then we also do our HMRC, Companies House reporting, and accounting and exporting support. So we do support UK GAAP and IFRS. With that in mind, I would like to offer anyone on this webinar a 20% discount on the platform. If you do want to hear anything else about Capdesk and how we can help early stage founders, then please do get in touch and we can take you through the platform. That is it for today. I know that we definitely have time left, so I did want to introduce my colleague Emmett here, who works in the SMB UK space with me. So if anyone has any questions or would like to raise any points, please do, and we can answer you. Is there anything in the chat, Emmett?
Hi all, lovely to meet you. Thank you, Karis. That was very informative. No questions in the chat. Just thought we'd open up to the floor if anybody's got any questions or any thoughts that you wanted to come off mute and share with us or ask to us at all.
If there is anything that comes to mind later or potentially you want a more detailed answer on, please do just email the team and we can get back to you with a more detailed answer. I know some people will be watching online as well. So again, please just email the team if so. Great. Well, hopefully that means that it was all well explained if there's no questions. But again, if anyone does have any questions regarding anything I went through today that needs clarifying or anything about Capdesk, please do drop us an email and we can go through. Thank you for all your time.